You've entered Bookstorm with Kristen Civiletto and me, Chris Storm. This is a podcast devoted to best-selling books that matter, books that make a difference. We're diving down deep with beloved authors about their stories. We're exposing hot-button topics and heartfelt themes, the issues that affect each of us in our own lives, as siblings, parents, partners, friends, as human beings. We're braving new ideas, fresh thoughts, hard lessons, and important truths. Those kinds of things that stay with us long after we turn the last page and close the book. Welcome back to Bookstorm Podcast, all of you book lovers. As you know, Kristen and I look long and hard to find you the best fiction out there. And that's why we have a return guest today with the wonderful and amazing Madeline Martin. We're thrilled because she's got a new book coming out called The BOOKLOVER'S LIBRary, September 10th. That's when this podcast will air. And Madeline, welcome back to Bookstorm.
Oh, thank you so much. It's so lovely to be here with you ladies again.
Now, we've grown a little since you've seen us last because we're very proud that we're in 90 countries, all 50 U.S. states, and 1,900 cities of loyal listeners. So we're going to get this book out there for you and get the buzz going.
Wonderful. Now, and congratulations.
Thank you. As you know, we like to give our listeners a little bit about your bio so they connect with you. And I love your history here. Madeline is a New York Times, USA Today, and Publishers Weekly international best-selling author of historical fiction and historical romance, although we're here to talk about the historical fiction. And your work has been translated, I see, into 25 different languages.
Right.
That is amazing. Congratulations.
Thank you.
You live in Florida with your daughters and a very spoiled cat. I love this about you. You are a die-hard history lover who will happily lose herself in research any day. And we're glad about that because these books show a lot of research.
Thank you.
You love mommying, you love travel, and you spent your childhood as an army brat in Germany.
Correct.
That's a pretty cool history.
Thank you.
I love your historical fiction. We had the Secret Book Society, the Lost Bookshop of London, the Librarian Spy, the Keeper of Hidden Books, and now this one, the BOOKLOVER'S LIBRary. And I love all this bookish history going on here because you showed us that books have been important forever. So we're so excited to have you back. Thanks for coming.
Oh, thank you. My pleasure.
Well, Madeline, as Chris mentioned, we're here to talk about the BOOKLOVER'S LIBRary. I want to show this beautiful cover as well. I like to give our listeners some of the backdrop of what's happening in the story. And if you'd like to add anything, please be our guest to do so. But this book takes place primarily in Nottingham, England. And we meet Emma Taylor. She is a widow and she finds herself desperately in need of a job. She's also a mother. And that is where we get some very difficult parts of the story. At the time in history, women were not permitted to work when they were mothers or when they were married. And there was something called the marriage ban that I know we're going to talk about shortly. She was left with not a lot of options, but she knew books, and she somehow persuades the manager of a bookstore to allow her to come on board and work there. Now, the threat of war in England is looming, and we know that even where she is in Nottingham, we've got this, this impending evacuation, and the children and some other people were being evacuated for their safety. But this was a tremendous source of stress for these parents, and Emma is about to go through that extreme trial. Now, in the story, she makes friends with a diverse group of people, her colleagues, and we see this beautiful community come together as she fights to be reunited with her daughter, Olivia. And they learn to depend on one another. She finds a strength within herself that maybe she didn't know that she had. And we also see this importance of books and how people bind themselves and bond together through them. Did you want to add anything to that background?
I think you did a really great job. Thank you for covering it so well.
Absolutely. Well,
I'd
Crystal,
like
kick us
you to
off.
come on my book tour and kind of help me out with that. That was perfect. Thank you.
I'm there.
Everybody says that to Kristen, and now all our listeners are tired of me saying this, but I say, can I come and I'll carry her briefcase?
I say we just have a big party of it.
Okay. So I just have to say for our listeners, thank you for showing us the importance of books, even during wartime, or maybe especially during wartime. We need some normalcy. Emma found work at the Boots Book Lovers Library. I love that little name. And as the war progressed, the library became more crowded than ever before. There were food rations, bombs dropping, no electricity and water. Her daughter Olivia said, I like reading. It's like my brain drinking in something good like warm chocolate milk. Yes, Olivia, so do all of we. And as the author of this truth, because you wrote this statement by Olivia, why were in our books so important, especially during difficult times, not even national or world, but maybe personal difficult times?
Well, I think books are always kind of our best comfort friends whenever we are going through struggles. I know for myself, I've always kind of turned to books whenever I'm having a difficult time. It's such a wonderful distraction. And I think that because books are so much more immersive than, say, like TV, when you're reading a book, you are absolutely not only there, you're not only seeing everything the character is seeing, but you're feeling all of the things that that character is feeling. And having that replacement of their feelings and what they're going through instead of having to think of your own troubles really is such a wonderful distraction. And, typically books do kind of end up wrapping up in a positive way by the end of the book. And it's always kind of a safe environment to experience all of that wealth of all of those emotions, knowing that you are in the safe hands of the author who is going to eventually steer you into a place that is going to be safe and that it's going to end up being all right one way or another. And kind of one kind of mention I wanted to make about Olivia with reading, feeling like warm chocolate milk for her brain. So Olivia, I actually based off of sort of a mix of my two girls when they were that age. And my youngest has always had this incredibly fresh perspective of how she says everything. And so when I wrote that line, it actually reminded me of something that my youngest daughter would say. And it just made me love Olivia all the more personally.
That's adorable. It's adorable. And even during the time of your book, when there's no electricity and there's bombs, why do you think people gravitated to that library?
Well, it's interesting because public libraries oftentimes had significantly more research books. They didn't really have a lot of the everyday novels that were available like we have today. It was a completely different environment that they had at public libraries, and then going to a bookstore. I mean, that was very expensive, especially as the ration continued. I had to worry about paper shortages, etc. But the lending library gave somebody the opportunity to be able to have an entire library at their fingertips for the cost of what would essentially be one paperback novel. And we all know as voracious readers how easily a good book can just completely be read through. And so who wants to go out and buy one book when you can have a year-long membership of an entire lending library? And these lending libraries actually were a really big thing at that particular time period. Unfortunately, a lot of them were kind of relegated to basements. They were kind of dark, dingy places. What set the Boots Book Lovers Library, because it really was an actual library that existed, apart from the other ones, is the fact that it was set in the Boots Chemist. And it was almost set either on the second floor or in the very back of the store. And when you walked in there, it had stained glass windows and thick pile carpet, comfortable chairs that you can sit into. They encouraged the women who worked there to bring in fresh cut flowers from their personal gardens. When you walked in there, it was almost a complete escape from the Boots Chemist that was happening behind you. And it really welcomed you to stay there and just enjoy the happiness of books and reading and discussing with the librarian what next book is going to be perfect for you.
Oh, thank you, because we got to go inside too.
You're welcome.
Man, I want to ask you about this law that Emma had to contend with. And it was known as the marriage bar, or some places the marriage ban. And these were laws in English speaking countries that banned married women from working. They had to resign when they got married. But also, when they became widows, they were also banned from working if they had children. And I wanted to ask you a little bit about what is the thinking underlying these laws? Was it trying to protect something in the family, or maybe even eliminate competition for men for these jobs? What do you
It
think?
definitely it definitely was a little bit of both of that. They definitely felt like a woman's place was being a mother and making sure that she was always available for her husband and for her children. In fact, a woman's job really was supposed to be a mother, because even when a woman ended up not getting married and not having children, she was, these matronly women who just kind of decided that they wanted to have a career. They were seen as sort of an anomaly. And it was something where, even though they did have, so the marriage bar really kind of applied especially to more reputable jobs. So with factories, for example, they didn't care as much, but they wanted more people who were maybe women who were 15 years old, just getting out of high school, with nimble fingers, really sharp eyes. Women who were 25 were just going to be a little bit too old and slow, which is funny to even think about 25 even being considered old. But so these places that had a higher end clientele, like the Boots Book Lovers Library, they wanted to make sure that they were following this marriage bar and preventing women from being taken away from their homes to have a place, to have a job. And it was really interesting, especially because the women who worked at the Boots Book Lovers Library enjoyed their job there so much that they had a statistically higher engagement than any other area of employment, because they didn't want to give up their jobs. And I had kind of fun, having a character who sort of represents that particular lifestyle. But it's interesting. I also think that it does come down to competition. They felt like women shouldn't be competition for men, but they also felt like women didn't have the mental capacity and the intelligence to be able to take the position that men had. And I think that sometimes when a woman proved herself worthy of such a role, it was actually offensive to men. And this was, I think, very evident not only in the application of the marriage bar, but also even when women in World War II took on military roles, the way that men perceived them and the way that men treated them, very much like they were incapable of these incredible feats that they were clearly succeeding at.
Yeah. Well, these marriage bans and bars are no longer legally in effect. But do you think that maybe some of these attitudes still persist?
I definitely think they persist. In fact, this story is actually probably the most personal story that I've ever written, because I had several years that I was a single mother of my two girls. And I incorporated a lot of those aspects into this book, a lot of the attitude that I received from other people for being a single mother, unfortunately, a lot of prejudice, which, if you can imagine a single mother receiving prejudice in this day and age when there's like a 40% divorce rate, can you imagine what it must have been in 1940? And so, I wanted to incorporate a lot of that aspect of it, of, not only how women are perceived in the workforce, but also how single mothers are perceived. But it's not all bad stuff either. I know, like, regarding with single motherhood, at least, one of the aspects that I also cover is sort of this feeling of like this really wonderful bond that I was able to have with my girls when it was just the three of us, and how beautiful that really can be.
Yeah. Well, that really spoke to me. And I like too that you're playing with that underlying idea of, well, if you're single because you're widowed, maybe that's different than some other reason. And you can tell a little bit of some of those attitudes creeping in too. But I really appreciated that whole aspect of this story. I too was a single mom and still am. And so, thank you for exploring that.
Yeah, my pleasure. It was very special for me to do it.
It resonates. This is what we love about historical fiction. We're still learning things from the past, and we haven't overcome all of them yet. We're still struggling. But what hit me the strongest was this relocation of children during the war to send them somewhere safe. It was so heart-wrenching. We saw Emma struggle with sending Olivia off somewhere, and she wondered if she made the right decisions. Her father-in-law said to her, as a parent, we can never know if we've made the right decision or not. Wow. In today's day and age, I could never imagine putting my kids on a train and they're going to go and live with somebody that I haven't interviewed, vetted, done a background check, whoever that poor babysitter is would go through the ringer. But why was it so different back then that they were allowing it? Was it just the time period, or was it the desperation of war and emotional safety? I just can't figure out, because it wasn't that long ago.
Right. I mean, when you think about it, it was absolutely less than 100 years ago. And, part of it was the desperation. I mean, obviously, I feel like we are significantly more mobile today than they were back then. I mean, a lot of times the place where you were born was the place that you died. There was no, oh, let me move across the country and take a job and I can work remotely, so a lot of times these people really didn't have the opportunity to be able to just pick up and leave and find a new job somewhere else and get a new home, especially in the middle of a war. So part of it was definitely the desperation, especially if you consider London, for example, that ended up having, oh my gosh, it's been a while since I've done the stats on this from the last bookshop in London, but I think, there were tens of thousands of deaths that came of that 7-month blitz that they had. And with Nottingham, while Nottingham wasn't necessarily a major city, they had a significant amount of factories that were located there. And of course, these factories were making arms for the war. So it made them a target. So of course, having the children there put them at risk, which is why they were one of the evacuation zones. I also think it definitely was a significantly different time period, not only for the fact that they didn't have nearly the access to information that we have today. And I think that's one of the biggest issues why that could never happen today. I mean, how many times as mothers have we put the search into our pedophilia app on the phone and you see it look like a Christmas tree around your house, no matter where you live. And all of a sudden, like, your kids are no longer allowed to go outside because you never know what might happen. They didn't have that. I mean, how many times do we open up the news and sadly, it's like every single day reading some horrific thing about a child who's been kidnapped and horrible things happen to that poor child. I mean, it makes you never want to let your child play in the front yard, let alone go to a neighbor's house and, heaven forbid, take a train to ride to an unknown destination that you have no idea, to a person you have never met. I mean, it's just mind-blowing that they did that, but they didn't have that fear, I think, because it wasn't so in their face the way that it is with us, the things that could happen. Also, I kind of feel like kids were of that, in that time period, were of that sort of mindset that they had to do what they were told. They were, basically the silent child, like always obeying, doing what they were supposed to do. It was, definitely not the way that the kids are in this particular world. Although you did, of course, have some that were feisty and kind of did what they wanted to. In fact, there's a part of the story that actually was inspired by a woman who had read The Last Bookshop in London and loved it so much because she had lived through the Blitz and she was a child who had been evacuated. And she reached out to me with her story. And I thought it was so wonderful. And she was so plucky that I had to incorporate an element of that into the story because she had inspired this one particular scene with Olivia, which I can't say what it is, but you'll have to read the book to find out.
Yeah. And maybe you showed us a little bit that there is still a lot of goodness in the world. We hear that one bad story and we start to assume there's danger everywhere, but there's a good feeling in knowing that all these people were sent out of London, and a lot of these kids were safe because of it. It's a good feeling too.
Oh, absolutely. To think that people would open up their homes and take these children in, and to be honest, the process of how these kids were selected was really horrible. I mean, they were pretty much, they would get dropped off wherever they were going to be at, and they were lined up like cattle, and people would come in and they would choose which ones they wanted. So in farming areas, a lot of times the tall, strong kids would be selected first because they would essentially be used as farm hands. And which is actually kind of funny because these kids had some of them had only ever grown up in a city. There were stories about children who were raised in the East End who couldn't tell the difference. They had no idea what a cow looked like, which is just, mind blowing to think that they saw a cow and they're like, what kind of dog is that? So it is funny kind of thinking about that, but and then like the cute kids would be picked first, and then you have the kids that aren't as cute that nobody wants. And I mean, when you look at all the detail behind it, it really is just such a heartbreaking thing, especially when you like at the very end of the war, when these kids were finally sent home. Not all kids stayed for the duration, but some kids were gone from their parents for 6 years. 6 years. Like I think about when my daughter, I drop her off at camp and I pick her up a week later, for the summer. I'm like, oh my gosh, who is this kid? She's grown like an inch. I can't imagine not seeing my child for months, if not years on end. It's just too heartbreaking to even honestly comprehend.
Wow. Thanks for showing us that.
I want to pick up on a little bit of what we've been talking about, because your story really does highlight the importance of relying on others and community. And here we saw a very diverse group of Emma's coworkers who were pulling together to survive a horrendous time in history. And I wanted to ask you about those bonds that are forged during difficult times, the friendships, the relationships, because some of these people weren't who we thought they were at first. But because of the circumstances, we got to see these very deep relationships. Do you think that's true?
Absolutely. I really do think that strife really does help. It brings out the worst in humanity sometimes, but in other ways, it really brings out the best in humanity. And a lot of that comes to people banding together. In fact, I think that's one of the things why the pandemic was so very difficult for us, because when the world feels like it's falling apart, humans have a tendency to really lock together and to really make that deep bond, especially if you hear about like men in foxholes together, or survivors of an accident or something where they're left alone for a while. They have this incredible bond with one another. There's something about surviving that really just makes people come together and really shows the beautiful part of humanity. And in that particular case with World War II, I see that so many times and so much of my research, how important community is, how neighbors will help out neighbors, how strangers will take in children that belong to other people to ensure that those babies remain safe during a war. It really is truly incredible that people are able to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, that was very inspiring. There were so many inspiring parts of this story, but that was one of the ones I really enjoyed, are those deep, deep bonds of friendship that
Thank you.
developed.
And I think it was especially important to Grace, because as I know, again, kind of going back to the single mother aspect of it, when I was a single mother, I felt like I don't know why, but I felt like I couldn't rely on anybody else. I felt like I had to do everything myself. And maybe it's because I was in this role where I had to be mother and father, and I just filled all of the roles. But letting other people in and letting that community sort of play a role in my life, it was a really difficult thing for me to do, but allowing that to happen really did enhance my happiness in life overall. And so that was a huge element of this story as well.
Absolutely. That was beautifully put. Well, we loved talking about this story. I want to show that beautiful cover again for our listeners and for our viewers on YouTube. Before we let you go, we're going to tell people how to get in touch with you, but can you share what you might be working on next? Maybe give us a little bit of a hint.
Yes. So my next book, actually, Chris had mentioned it at the very beginning, which is it's on its way, but it hasn't been published yet. This will be coming out next year, and that is The Secret Book Society. And so this is again about books and their importance, but it's set during the Victorian era. And it's about a countess who has been widowed 3 times, and she's young, and she sees women being repressed with their reading materials. And so she opens up her home library to them, and she creates what's called the Secret Book Society. And while the husbands think that they're, just having tea and gossip and all of that, really they are having a lot deeper conversations, a lot more clandestine. So, yeah.
That sounds
That sounds
great.
fantastic. Wonderful.
Thank you.
Well, I want to tell our listeners you have a beautiful website, madelinemartin.com. You're also very active on social media. You're on Facebook, on X, on Instagram, on Pinterest. But we really want to encourage our listeners to read this book, to read all of your books. We just love the stories that you tell, and they speak to us on all these human elements and levels. We love it. So thank you for being with us, and we hope to see you for your next story.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. So good to
Bye.
see you, Madeline.
So good seeing you ladies too. Thank you.
As always, Kristen, so wonderful to see Madeline Martin and talk about books throughout history and the importance of it. And I just want to go back to one thing. I really liked your question that talked about that married women were not allowed to work. I mean, this just blows your mind, doesn't it? We have seen a lot of historical fiction that shows the repression of women back then, and it wasn't that long ago. This is something that we wouldn't even think would be an issue today. And I just thought I loved how in this book story about the library and the secret lending library that women were given an opportunity they couldn't have had and that they excelled at it.
Yeah. And I enjoyed that too. And I thought it was very interesting because there's a difference between encouraging a policy. We want to encourage somebody to be home with children or whatever it was that they were going for, and then legally requiring it. And so that to me was one of the really interesting aspects. We are going to mandate this and force a behavior change or an attitude change. So that was pretty interesting.
It
I
did.
also was very taken with this idea too of that stigma of being a single mother. And, it does change relationships. It changes relationships between people of different sexes. I mean, let's be real, we're still contending with that. How did that strike you in this story?
Well, I have a lot of friends who are single mothers, including you. And yes, that resonated with me. I thought it was very judgmental, unrighteously so, to assume because you are a single parent that you're not doing as well, or maybe even better than a toxic partner that maybe you had had to separate from, or in the case of a death of a loved one. Now that's heartfelt, but it doesn't mean you can't go on and continue that legacy. It's very narrow-minded, and I hope we're evolving out of there. I feel that we've made some great strides, but I don't think we're there yet. You?
Yeah. No, I agree. And I've encountered that kind of prejudice and different treatment. So it was very interesting to see it played out where there's certain things that maybe haven't changed over the years. And certainly there's some things that have changed, but sometimes those attitudes are still prevalent.
Mhm.
So
And the other thing that I wish I could have asked her this, um, Mr. Beard had a mass observation. He was a character in the book that just went around recording everything he saw during the war. People, what they were doing, what they were wearing. He was secretly listening to conversations and writing them down. The weather, the mood. And everyone thought he was silly. But I sat there really loving him. And he said, historians will look back on this someday and obtain keen insight. Because isn't the truth about humankind more than the headlines? There's a war, there's food shortages. It's how did we react? Like Madeline said, how did we band together? How did we maybe weaken, or how did we become stronger? And I really loved that. Do you think that still goes on today? I feel like there's more keen observations going on and being recorded today than ever before.
absolutely, especially in times of distress, we see character be forged. And, we always talk about the greatest generation because they experienced a world war. They were forced to sacrifice. And so we talk about their character. And so I'm very interested about how we're going to look back at the characters being developed now, where we have a lot of strife going on and a lot of different aspects and different challenges. So historians will have to look back on that one, I guess.
This will be
But
interesting.
oh, absolutely. Well, I want to tell our listeners they can follow us on social media, and we love when they do, and we love when they spread our links. You can find us on Facebook, on X. We are on TikTok, and we have a beautiful website at bookstormpodcast.com. And a lot of people love us on YouTube because you can see these amazing authors that we have. And listeners, we have an exciting lineup. Just a few of the authors that we have booked: Jeffrey Deaver and Isabella Maldonado with Fatal Intrusion, Amy Runyon with Mademoiselle Eiffel, Shelley Noble, The Colony Club, Jessica Strauser, Catch You Later, Fran Littlewood, Amazing Grace, M.P. Woodward for Tom Clancy's Shadow State, Lori Frankel with Family, Robert Dugoni, Beyond Reasonable Doubt, Michael Ledwidge, No Safe Place, and Linda Cohen-Loigman, The Love Elixir of Augusta Stern. These were such fantastic books. So we are continuing to grow. Come along with us. And listeners, just remember, until next time, one of the best ways to brave the storm is to dive down deep into life-changing fiction.